Did you do Benny today? Oh, yeah, his mother-in-law. Oh, maybe he does. He's lovely. Who knows? Yeah, he does a lot of social media, so yeah, that's good. So he does a good job, I'll say. Yeah. Pardon? to it, I think, on the way over here. Call this James City County Board of Supervisors special meeting to order. Good afternoon, everyone. No meeting August, quickly went to special meeting August. So thank you to my board colleagues and to staff and to our guests that will be presenting today. Appreciate everyone coming out, especially given Tropical Storm Debbie. So, Mr. Stevens, if you'll call the roll.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Null?
Present.
Mr. Hippel?
Here.
Mr. McGlennon?
Here.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Here.
Ms. Larson?
Here.
All present.
Our first item is board discussion, guidance, government center discussion. That will be led by Assistant County Administrator Brad Reinheimer. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, board members, Mr. Stevens, and our wonderful guests. Thank everybody for being here today. Before I go into kind of my part of the presentation, I do want to take just a minute to introduce some of the folks that are here today. As we've gone through this government center process, as I will discuss in just a couple minutes, we formed an internal working group that reviewed the proposals and have worked diligently and have spent a ton of hours and a lot of time working with our architects and the builder and the engineering folks to get us to where we are today. So I did want to just take a moment and introduce them. So we have Grace Boone, our General Services Director, Sean Gordon, our Chief Civil Engineer, Sharon McCarthy, our FMS Director, Patrick Page, our IRM Director, and Paul Holt, our Director of Community Development. We also brought in an outside consultant, Jim Yotzik with MVP, who couldn't be here today, to help us through that process. So that's been our working group, and when I talk about the things that we've done, that's who I'm talking about. They're the ones who really put in the effort and the time to get us to where we are today. And I also want to introduce Al Davis from Henderson, and he's going to take a moment and introduce some of his folks to you.
Thank you, Brad, and thank you to the board for allowing us to be here today. We look forward to sharing a lot of information with you about the upcoming projects. Thank you. I'll start from my left and introduce Brad Sykes, as well as Michael Creasy. These are both the lead architects and project managers for our design partner, Guernsey Tingle. To my immediate right, Rodney Freeman with Henderson Incorporated. Leslie Schultz, president of Henderson Incorporated. Tingle. Tom, maybe we'll remind you of your title now. Former president. So, Tingle, Henderson, Guernsey Tingle. Peter Henderson, Henderson Incorporated, and Heather Harmon, Henderson Incorporated. Thank you.
Thank you, Al, and they have been really great to work with. Going into this project, I think I knew Mr. Tingle a little bit from seeing him at board meetings, but I didn't know anybody else here in that group. And I think we've done very well to establish very positive working relationships, and they've been really great to work with. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. So I feel obligated to give a little bit of the history, and I'll be brief, just so everybody who might be watching or listening or might listen to this later on, they have a little better understanding. So back in, I don't know, what year did you get on the board, Mr. Hippel?
13.
Back about 10, 11 years ago, we started having some discussions about a desire and a need to build a new consolidated government center. Talked about for years. We probably really got more serious about it back in 2020 when we did a space needs study. We did a facilities master plan and started looking at the costs of building a new government center versus staying where we were. It got us up to around December of 2022 when we received an unsolicited proposal from Henderson Gilbane Group. At that time, we brought that to the board. We formed our working group. We evaluated that proposal, made a recommendation to the board that we felt it generally met sort of the kind of stuff we were looking for. And that was really all that was required of it. We accepted that proposal. You accepted that proposal. And then we advertised for 120 days and it allowed any competing proposals to be submitted. During that time, after the end of the 120 days, we did receive one additional competing proposal. It was at that time we brought on the outside consultant, Mr. Yotzik with MVP, to kind of help us through that process and evaluate the two proposals and compare and contrast. And it was at that point we brought it back before the board, and the board made that decision to move forward with the Henderson Gilbane Group. After that, we negotiated an interim agreement to take us up to 30% design, which started back in April timeframe, end of March, early April. And we've been working on that ever since. The intention of that interim agreement was to take us up to 30% design. We're about halfway through that, and we have gotten through the programming phase. And programming phase is where we kind of decide how much space we need, who's going to be next to who in the building, who's going to be in the building, and just some overall general ideas about how the building is going to be designed. But we got to that point where we wanted to start doing some drawings and some schematics and putting some floor plans in place where we really needed some direction from the board on what you wanted to see. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's why we're here today. So hopefully we leave here today with those questions answered. That's my goal, is to have these 4 items sort of worked through today with guidance from you. The site layout, and Brad's going to come up here and talk a lot about that, and I know I sent you all kind of a photo of that last night for you to kind of review a little bit, and I've talked to you all about it since. Discussion about school administration, being a part of the building, and I, again, talked with you all about that a little bit, site parking, and then some exterior concepts. And Brad has a whole bunch of pictures he's going to show you, and it's not, yes, we want the building to look just like that. It may be, you know, you may see one that you're like, that's exactly what I'm envisioning, but it's really more just about concepts. Do you want to see more glass than brick? What kind of brick? What kind of elevation? That kind of stuff is what we're going to look for input on today, just to help them design fewer pictures for you to look at later on when we're making the actual decision of what the exterior of the building is going to look like. So that's where we are. Site layout, our site absolutely has some limitations. You know, we're certainly limited in size. The topography on the site adds some other challenges for us, but I think we've worked through those. School administration, you know, we've always discussed having them in there as an option, where at the end of the day, when we make the decision to move forward to build, if we go that way, we can do it with school admin or without. The site plan that we have today, I think, allows us to do that and allows us to continue on the design of the rest of the building so it's not negatively impacted whether or not we choose to include school admin in there. Site parking, similar types of issues. We are constricted somewhat on the size of the site. Do we want to build a parking deck, exterior parking deck? Do we not want any parking deck? Do we just want to use surface parking? Or do we want to use some sort of underground podium type parking, which is what Brad's going to talk a little bit to and what we're kind of recommending going forward. And then the exterior concepts I already talked about. So those are the 4 things I really want to get guidance from you all today. And Brad's going to give his presentation, and I'm sure some others will chime in. Then at the end, I'm going to come right back to this slide and make sure that we're clear with the direction that we want to move forward. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. Brad, it's all yours.
And we try to make this as easy as possible, so Brad, so no matter what one of us is going to answer. Oh, what did I do? Which one do I hit to do the next one? Okay. I already messed up the presentation, I'm sorry. Oh, perfect. So when we started, and I should say that Clark Nixon is out also working with us. They weren't able to be here today. So Guernsey Tingle and Clark Nixon have been working from an architectural standpoint. And when we started looking at how this could possibly fit on the site, one of the things that came up very quickly is that we knew that we wanted the buildings to be somewhere between 60 to roughly 80 or 90 feet wide. And the reason that is, and when I say wide, that's this dimension across here. And that was really from a lot of examples we looked at and a lot of site investigations we did. And we were really doing that from a sunlight standpoint. We want sunlight to come into the space. That will help with the LEED certification to whatever level we go. But that became one of the first criteria that we decided. The other thing we started looking at is that this building is large, right? It's in rough terms, 164,000 square feet. And if you start doing the math where this is somewhere around 80 feet wide, that's a really long building. And we knew that we had to start looking at multiple levels. So we started looking at 2 to 3 levels, 4th level, which we'll have a little discussion on as a possibility as well with some caveats. And so we figured out that's still a big building to put on this site. And we knew we needed to break that up so it doesn't look like one long building. And so that's what this analysis was, is how could we possibly break that up? So when you see these squares like this, This really is a grouping of departments. Does that make sense? So we've already done that analysis to figure out how much square footage needs to be in an apartment, in each department. When we show nothing in the middle, that is still one building. And then this building over here is actually connected, and it's really hard on the screen, but that's a blue circle, so that's really the entry point. So the concept, just so everybody knows, that is still one building, not three separate buildings. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so when we look at that, that's true for this scheme and even scheme number 3, where that's still one building. We gave another option where you see this little green spot between this, that is actually outside area. And so this concept was organizing everybody along a cross axis, and then you would end up with a grouping of what looked like buildings along that center axis. This one was having that same center axis, but having one large building on this side, and then a smaller, probably 2-story connection to it. And then this one finally was two separate spaces with that another building in between them. So again, one building, and then a grouping of buildings along. And after we kind of went through all of that analysis, the scheme in the middle was eliminated pretty quickly. We decided we did not really like the idea of having smaller buildings. We needed this thing to be broken down in scale, but we still wanted it to read primarily as a single building. So we looked at all the analysis between these two, and one of the things that's important to note is really the EOC. So if you go through the program, there's been a lot of discussion about what the EOC needs to be, and it has been determined by this group that that EOC does not need to be standalone dedicated space. We're going to use that space for the majority of the year as something else, but in the event of an emergency, we would take over that area and use it for that emergency event. Does that make sense? So it's not standalone, it is double use space. However, what that also means is that area that we're going to use as an EOC has to have special criteria for it, because it has to be designed to withstand the event that, for the emergency event. And we looked at, from a cost analysis, could we treat the whole building that way? And it became very clear we could raise the building up, but we didn't want to make the whole building reach the same level as the EOC. So we decided it was a lot easier to pull the EOC out, not tuck it into the main building, but pull it out and actually be able to harden just that one section. And along with it, because everybody loves the video center so much, we decided that the video center really needed to be a part of that, because in the reality, the EOC probably most likely would be what we're doing right here today, which is the boardroom. The boardroom would serve as an excellent EOC. The square footages line up. The concepts would be that it's a great gathering space anyway, just for this service. And so it really makes sense, as that's the use that we could harden. And that's why the video center has a direct connection to it. So that is what this little element is out here. That is a 1.5-story, 2-story hardened part of the building that includes the EOC. Does that make sense to everybody? And we could do that similar on this option, but it becomes, we would have to define where we actually want to do that. So it's just a little bit cleaner. That was probably one of the biggest difference between these two options. And so after going back and forth and discussing all of these, we really decided, which is what you expect. People were like, well, I really like this element because I have a very nice, clean entrance, but I like this option over here because this EOC element is broken out. And so the question was, is there any way you could take the best of these two worlds and combine them into one? And that's what this did. So we actually took that first option, option number 1, and flipped it over. So this was the top part, and this is our little EOC over here. Does that make sense? And we were able to break this open and able to get that same entrance that we liked on the other scheme without having the two separate buildings. So we actually have one very connected single building. And then after we got this done, there was this question that came up, could you actually take the school administration building, and I think it was from comments made by the board, and connect it to this building and actually make it one as opposed to a standalone building? So that's what you see here, is outlined in this little corner, is how we would recommend the school administration be connected to this building so that this really becomes one functioning space. And then what we have is the first floor, a second floor, and a third floor. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Nope. All right, let me show you how that fits on a site. So this is where we kind of ended up, which is that this is that option one with the EOC over here, the primary building stretching along here, and then the school admin as a possibility being directly connected to the building. And one of the reasons we ended up placing the building in this central location is a couple reasons. Number one, we knew that we wanted this entry to be immediately visible from Ashbury and from the primary entrance, because this really is where the vast majority of people will enter the site. And one thing that was very clear that this working group said over and over again is that when people come onto the site, we don't want them to guess where to enter. That's one of the things I know that they struggle with now on the existing complex. When someone comes into this property for the very first time, will it be intuitive where they need to go? And we need to make that point very clear from this entrance. So once we knew that as a criteria, this entrance really needs to address this lower part of the entry and Ashbury itself, since that's the primary entry point. The other thing that was pretty clear is that along Depew, this really is the main circulation spine. We needed this building to address that in a formal way. So what we have here is we have created what we would refer to as a nice formal lawn where the building is addressing it, but this still isn't set in Richmond, right? So we're not taking this building and pushing it all the way up here like you would in an urban setting. We're pulling it back, giving it a little bit of a breathing space, but still allowing the building to address the main drive. And this becomes a very nice center focus space, so when people are coming along, they can see the building, and then when they come in and they turn, they can see exactly where to enter the building. So it's addressing you along the roadway, and then it gives you a very clear entry point. The other thing that we found out on the site is that this area back here is really where the service entrance needs to be. It lines up with this entrance here, so from a VDOT standpoint, this becomes a logical entry point. And then we could put a parking deck back here in this corner, have potentially a staff parking, but this really becomes the staff entry and the service entry into the site. And the other thing that we liked is that the school admin wing really starts to address the existing rec building so that there's good circulation that could happen between those two spaces. The parking that we add would be immediately adjacent to this, so all of this starts to read as a whole complex as opposed to two standalone buildings. Even though we are designing this to function as a standalone, we still want it to look like those buildings are related to each other and that they all function together. Does that make sense? So this is where we stand today with the parking deck being an option, the school admin being an option, and then we started talking what else could we do. And one of the things that came up was when I think for your guys' guidance, that school admin, when it gets combined, that is a great thing for this building. And so we've kind of listed out why it is better to attach it. Even if it's attached at a later date and time, if it's attached versus a freestanding, we get a much more efficient mechanical, electrical, and plumbing system. So we can make the system able to expand to accommodate it, even if that is down the road. And that will make it, from a maintenance standpoint, a lot easier to maintain a mechanical system that's serving both the primary building and the school admin building all under one roof. Okay? The other thing is that, as brought up, and I think this was comments from the board, is that during any emergency, it will be easier to have that directly attached as opposed to having two separate buildings. So that if you needed to go back and forth between those buildings, you can do that without any problems during emergency. And then some of the obvious ones is that there is the maintenance. And the one thing we want to talk about is that as soon as I put this all under one roof, no matter where I put it, it becomes efficient because I'm maintaining one building, which is the whole concept of this project, right? Right now we have multiple buildings in James City County, and we're pulling together, and as Brad pointed out, all the study that we did prior to this shows that that is a more cost-effective in the long run. That same concept applies to this, whether it's a school admin building and the rest of the building, or if we can pull it into one. Make sense? Okay. The other thing that we really liked about it is that it gives us better security. So now we can have one entry point into the primary building, and you can still get to the school admin or any other departments you want to go to, excuse me. And the other thing is that it gives us future flexibility. So even if that is built today, we're all somewhat guessing, educated guesses on what's going to happen 20 years from now. But the school admin could grow, and if they need to grow, there's space in this building that they could grow into as opposed to being a standalone building. So it gives you a lot more flexibility down the road because everybody's connected and you can share spaces back and forth. And then the fourth floor. One of the reasons we're shying away from a fourth floor and we want to really maintain 3 floors is really because of the building code. So the building code, for whatever reason, draws this magical line between the 3rd floor and the 4th floor. And as soon as I go up to that 4th floor, there's a lot of things I have to do that then get applied to the whole building. One of those simple ones is that the elevator system and the stairwell systems all get more critical because people are traveling 4 stories versus 3 stories. So now my elevators have to be on generators, they have to be power backed up, they have to be air conditioned and cooled. I mean, there's a lot of criteria that go into that. And the same thing's true from the exterior, is that the cladding on the exterior of the building, once I cross that magical 3rd floor, has to go to a higher flame spread. And the reason is that if it gets taller, it becomes more difficult to fight a fire. And so you have to rate the building to a different level on the exterior skin. And so we really think that from a cost standpoint, it's better to keep the building at 3 stories. The other thing that's driving this is that the soils out there aren't horrible, but they are a little soft. And so we believe that they will be more accommodating to the loading that would be for a 3-story building versus a 4-story building. That make sense? Okay. Next thing I'd like to show you is that this is almost the same plan. So let me flip back and forth between these real quick. So this is where we are. We have the parking deck here. We have the school admin over here. On this one, you can see that that parking deck has disappeared. And what we're really would like to consider is taking away the parking deck and putting the parking underneath the building in what we were calling a podium parking. So you think about this area as a walkout basement, meaning that this whole side is buried into the ground because this site slopes from here all the way down to here. And then this whole front of that parking is at grade. So across that building, we're losing one whole level. That makes sense? So on the back side, we're at or below grade, but on the front, we're at grade. So all of that would be a great place to add parking. And there's a lot of things that we like about that parking. Number one, it has better security because I'm parking under the building. It can have immediate access up into the building from different locations. All of staff at 200, we can park a lot of people underneath that building, and they can go up and get into their departments without having to go outside, without having to expose to just the simple things as weather. So it's more efficient from that side. And then with this being open, it's still a nicer environment because we can keep this whole side open so that you still have natural air down there. So it's not like going into parking that's completely below grade. From the most part, as you can see, a huge part of this front will have air that goes into that space. So it still feels like a parking garage, but we get a lot of the benefits of having it stepped into the ground. And the best part is that from a purely egocentrical aesthetic standpoint, I love the idea that this view, I don't have a parking garage sitting here, right? Like this becomes the main drive coming into this area. I'm not looking at a parking garage sitting on this corner. When I put this underneath here, that parking garage really goes away. You really don't see it. And then the other thing that I like, and let me show you the difference, is that see how large this parking is here? On the other scheme, it's pretty small. And the reason is because we have to pull this down so that that parking garage can be there. But when we don't have the parking garage, now we can put the building even more centered and we can get larger at-grade parking for the general public. So not only do we get more parking by doing this from the parking garage, we actually can get the potential to have even more parking at grade, or any of this space can be used for a future expansion of the building in 30 years from now or 40 years from now, just because we have more open space all the way around the building. So we think that putting that as podium parking really frees up a lot of different things.
And just to be
Yes.
clear, it's just one level underneath
Just
the
one
building?
level.
Okay.
Yep. That was the site and the building. Let me go back, sorry. Anybody else have any questions about that? I ran through that really fast, I know.
What was the, with the parking in the back, you talked about that potentially being some employee parking.
Oh, back here?
Yeah, there,
Yeah.
on either one, you know,
Yes.
the back parking lot.
That's true.
Which would
Yep.
be
Staff
access.
parking or-
How would access, would there be a separate access point for employees from the backside?
So what we've talked about, and we honestly haven't gotten that far, but
Okay.
what we've talked about is that we would have access here for staff, and we could even have access here off of Ashbury for
Okay.
staff. And then on this plan, because we pulled it back, we could actually wrap that parking all the way around.
Okay,
And so it really is going to come down to ultimately what everybody wants from a security of the surface parking lot. So if the 200 spaces underneath the building are enough for secure spaces, then we can leave this all being open. If we want additional secured parking, we can figure out how we can secure the staff parking lot on the backside or a portion of it.
okay.
Brad, what about in the building itself from staff?
Yes, so what we're really, well, let me go all the way back to this concept, is that this was showing our circulation spine, and the idea is that that staff parking is really back here, the main entrance is here. Does that make sense? We would have staff, we'd have an entry right through here, so that staff, and the staff parking
Okay.
comes here, they have a dedicated entrance that comes directly into the building.
That's what I was driving at.
Yes.
Is so that you didn't have to walk all the way around the building if you were going to get back in that parking lot.
Correct.
But you still had the ability to maintain security.
Yep.
Okay,
So you can have, if we did podium, you have entry up into the building along here,
Mhm.
and the staff back here have their own secured entrance off that staff parking lot.
okay.
So this plan allows for multiple secured entry points.
Think of the LEC.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now with the podium parking, then you're basically utilizing the slope to land instead of building a wall all the way up to put a first floor on it.
Correct.
You're basically capturing that section of land, flattening that area in order to put parking, which is originally, was part of the thought process of the
Right.
building.
Right.
Was that if our employees, if it's raining or like weather today, they can go down the elevator and they're parked underneath.
Right.
They've got all their stuff they're taking home with them, put it in their car, and until they pull out of that podium parking there underneath the building, that they get any weather at all. And if it's snowing or anything else, the vehicles are protected, the employees are protected, and plus it's a secure zone so that if something, God forbid, it ever were to happen, we'd have some security in place. It wouldn't be just a random parking spot out there.
That's correct.
Where
Yep.
somebody could walk up on somebody easily.
Yep, and one of the things that we didn't know is that when we started doing all of the interviews with the departments, is that social services, that if they have somebody who needs help after hours, they actually have to come to the building and trade out their personal car to get in a company car to go make that call. So in that event, the whole building could almost be shut down, but if you had that secure podium parking underneath, they could do that exchange of their vehicles in a secure space and leave, and not, even if that's well after hours, and not have any worries. And that was something that I don't think we really appreciated until we had those conversations with them, is that they needed that ability to make that car exchange, because they're not allowed to drive their personal vehicles to any of those calls.
And I think that adds into a lot of what we've been talking about as far as the board, as far as what we're doing and what we can do for our employees, so that we can retain them and keep them. And this is just another item as far as pay and benefits and everything else, that is another benefit for our employees in order to retain them and keep them for 30 years till they retire.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very important.
Now, I will have to say, because Al will throw something at me if I don't say it, there's a cost associated with
It
it,
is,
right?
yep.
Because the parking in a parking deck at grade going up is cheaper than building this parking. And I agree wholeheartedly that it does help us from a site standpoint, but there's still a dollar figure associated with that podium parking.
But even with a dollar figure, and the sky's not the limit, but if we're gonna do a project like this, we've got one bite at the apple. We need to not think of it in a way of, oh my gosh, I've got to save a nickel here. And we've done it on tons of projects through the years. And those projects, we go back later and fix them or add that piece on, double the cost of what it costs today.
Right.
And the cost is not going to go down tomorrow.
No.
Costs will continue to rise. And if you're going to, like I've said in the past, if you're going to be a bear, be a grizzly. So if you're going to take a bite of this apple, we need to take the biggest bite we can take, because in the long run, you're looking at a 50-year building that is going to serve the citizens of James City County for years to come. And it's going to be something that, you know, is not going to be, well, they spent what they could and they band-aided this and did that. And not that our board would do that, just, you know, people tend to get pressure on them as far as, well, don't spend that, don't spend this. Well, then, you spend, if you don't spend enough now, you're gonna spend it later.
Right.
Pay me now or pay me later. And, if we're gonna do it, we need to do it right.
Right.
That's my piece.
The other question I had was, that you're underneath parking, you said, is that to accommodate 200?
Sorry, say that again?
How much parking under the building?
200.
200, and
Yeah.
is that what you would be looking for essentially if you did the parking deck itself as well?
So
About
the
the same.
parking deck, as it stands right now, we were only originally planning on 2 levels, which would net us 120.
Okay.
So this is more. So I think, when we've been talking about it, it's really comparing a 3-level parking garage, which would get us up to 180 compared to the 200.
Okay.
And Brad, you may want to mention the added benefit of the terrace that goes.
That's true. Yep. So the one thing I didn't, well, I guess it shows up here, is that because we have sized this parking garage to the podium parking to be a normal parking, meaning that it's not an angled parking, it's a regular 90-degree turn-in parking. And we've done that trying to maximize the number of spaces, right? Because the good old 90-degree turn, or the 90-degree parking is the most efficient from a density standpoint. So that has a certain width to it, right? 24 parking space, 24 for a drive aisle, and so on. And so that is a wider dimension than the building itself, because that adds up to about 120 to 128, depending on how you want to calculate it, width-wise. And we're pushing somewhere around 80 to 90 width-wise. And so what we're recommending is that extra width actually be used as a terrace. So if I go back to this plan, we have the entry into that parking garage here, because that is the easiest point to make that happen, because that's where the grade's the lowest, right? We don't have to cut in any additional. That's the kind of the logical entry point in. And then this little white spot across here, and whether that goes across the whole width or whether we stop it, we really haven't gotten to that point yet. But we think that this would be a great place for the terrace. Just because we have that extra width, it would be a nice thing it's a great gathering spot for the general public. When they come to the building, it's a great gathering spot for people. And as I think we've talked about, there's always been this desire to have this outdoor eating area. And we always kind of said, well, it'd be great to be up on a roof somewhere or something like that. We see this as being able to replace that. So instead of having to put it up on the 3rd floor roof, we can put it along here if desired. And this becomes, again, that nice front lawn with what we hope is a wet pond out here. And this becomes just a great setting. And as you remember, if you've been out there, there's a walking trail that comes all the way along here. So we really see this as a very natural space. And then when you have this terrace overlooking that, that becomes just a really good place to go out and have your lunch or have events after for the general public or anything else.
I like that. I like that concept because, you know, we had talked about this, like you said, on the roof.
Right.
And putting something so our employees could, you know, the day goes and it's not going exactly right, or this or that's going on, and you want to take a break, you want to get away a little bit, but you don't have time enough to go out anywhere. You can walk back there on that terrace and sit there and get 10, 15, 20 minutes and clear your head, sit there and enjoy the weather, enjoy the pond, enjoy, I'm sure, like we always do, all of our parks and all that, everything, and our grounds people will have that beautiful when it's all said and done. And it'll be a nice area to sit there and relax, take a few minutes,
Right.
and then go back to work, which, you know, all of us need every now and then.
Right.
So that's nice. I like that.
Any other questions? Brad said you guys are going to be really hard on me today, so
They're just
You're
getting
not
going.
done yet.
Okay. All right, do you want me to go on to the exterior? All right, so this is where we are, the site plan that you saw. We really haven't started studying the exterior and what this building could look like, but we thought as long as we had your attention today, we would ask you for what your thoughts were. And so our starting concept is that this really needs to be based on classical proportions. We are James City County, Williamsburg is always going to be associated with us, so we want this to be based on classical proportions. However, we do not want this to be a historic building. So we want to base it on historic proportions and good solid historical materials, but then we want to sprinkle over the top of that what we've been calling James City County common sense. Does that make sense? We want to balance those two things. So we want it to be modern, and we want it to be a building that reaches from now to 50 years from the future, but we also want it to be based on our history, which is where we're getting the historical proportions, and then balancing those two things together. So, as Brad will tell you, this is the best example of architecture in the entire state of Virginia.
Which school is that?
So, this really does start to speak a language that we think would be appropriate here, where we have these brick. I think brick really needs to be a part of this. It's a part of the entire area. But then you can see they've mixed in what is really a much more modern type of architecture in between those. And the other thing this building is starting to do, and I'm sorry I don't have a full photograph of it. I'm sure Brad has one framed that he could have brought in for us. But you have this solid piece, and then you have this opened piece, and then you have another solid piece. So while this is actually a very long building, they've broken it into pieces that are much more to scale. And that's what, and I don't remember who the architect was. Unfortunately, it wasn't Guernsey Tingle, but they did the exact same thing of breaking this building up into manageable visual pieces. And that's really what we would recommend. This has kind of been our little joke, is we want to go from this modern, this historic, and be somewhere right here in the middle between those two elements. So these are examples of buildings, and most of these are existing buildings, and they don't all necessarily, they're not all, very few of them are actually government buildings, but we'd like to get your feel on what you see here. Now, we didn't look at height, we're not really worried about height or anything else, but like on this building, you see how they have started to do the same thing. They have brick. On this particular one, they have some metal cladding, but they have a lot of windows as well, and then they have some great big open pieces. But they've broken apart a really large building into some pieces. The one thing that is maybe a little more fussy than we're thinking about is that they've done that with a lot of different heights as well. On this one, we don't really have the different heights. We have some pretty simple shapes. We're trying to keep them very simple, but we're still trying to break them in. And then that's what this one does. This one has the same height, but they have started to do that same thing where they're breaking that apart into different elements. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to flip through these really quickly and kind of highlight some things, and then give you guys time to tell me what you like. This building, much more, same concept, much more historic, right, in its elements, but you can see how they have the glass and the brick, and then of course that's contrasting the very historic parts. But again, we're talking about using the proportions, which these buildings do, but applying them with modern feel. Here's another example of how they've taken some very solid forms and broken them apart. So again, you see the brick piece, and then you see the glass. And then over here, this one, they've done similar things with breaking the building down into pieces to make it a little smaller and feel more to scale. Here's another example, completely contrasting, where they have taken the glass and they've kept the same form. So very similar type building, but two totally different approaches. But they've used the same thing, is that all of these buildings use very classical proportions to organize their spaces, but they've done it in different ways. Again, you see here some more solid pieces, and this looks kind of similar, again, taller to that law enforcement thing that we have here in James City County, but a solid piece with a glass element in between. And so that concept is kind of what's been applied to all of these. This one really starts to push then that modern even more, where now they're pulling the roof out, but you can see glass. And this one, the entrances get these really large overhangs. And so we want to get your input on that. And then this one starts to kind of bring that back down into where you have some very simple brick forms with glass in between them. Again, a mix of the modern and classical proportions. And then a similar feature here where we have glass and brick breaking up the overall shape of the building. And then these are a couple examples. This obviously is a much more historic building, but we had this one in here to, again, kind of show those classical proportions, and then show this really is kind of a modern interpretation of very similar type of proportions. And then two examples, again, solid piece broken up with a more entry elements being glass with another solid piece. And on this one, they've even added kind of this really crazy roof form over the top of it. But again, the same concept is applied. Solid piece, glass, and then more solid. And again, breaking up the volume of the building. And then this one is, you know, I don't really endorse this school, but anyway. You can see how they have used very classical proportions to organize, again, what really is a very simple building, but they've done it with classical proportions. And then down here, and my little pointer is dying, is that you can see the same thing, how they're using the different glass and the different materials to break it up. Again, more examples of that. And then this starts getting into some of the detailing of the brick piers with glass in between. And then this actually starts to show what could potentially happen with a terrace. So this is actually a terrace up here, and you could actually have this as the parking garage or something like that across the front. So again, to try to keep it open and still have an open terrace on the top. And then I wanted to show you these because these were part of the original submission. So when we submitted the originals, we had a couple of concepts of what this building could be. And so this is based on that footprint, but again, with no input from anybody. This is what we did our own, but you start to see the same language of these solid pieces. Again, this was when we were talking about doing 4 stories, but breaking it up with the glass. This being a potential entry element, and then that was the overall. Okay, so yeah,
So
tell me what your
guess
feels are.
I don't know how you're gonna get 5 different people to go through that and whittle it down. So I think that's gonna be an interesting exercise. I like this one.
Okay.
And the reason that I do is because when we went and looked at some other places, I liked the glass in the middle that looked out over what you're talking about, looking over the wet area.
Right.
Over onto over to the trail, over to the parking, the street, just the openness of that, and then pulling that back to other people so that everyone had a little bit of the sun, you
Yep.
know, even if they were in the middle of the building. So, and if you're gonna look at history, to be honest, in James City County, you'd have to look at a fort. You know, we can't go look at those buildings in the city of Williamsburg to get what our history is. So I guess I've given my opinion, so I'm sure everyone wants to give their opinion. I just don't know how you're gonna find, it'll be interesting to
So-
see how you get that down to,
Yeah, we're not looking for a conclusion. So what you just said is great information. And so if everybody gives, like, it's just similar, that gives us a direction to head. And what our goal is to take all that information, go away, and come back with options. So just, you know, we really kind of wanted to be pointed in the right direction, for lack of a better term. Does that make sense?
yep. I don't think anyone else has anything else to say.
Okay, well, great.
Nice try, Ruth.
I haven't spoke yet.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I like the idea of, like you say, you got a building, and then you connect another one, and you have the thing in between. I think if you're gonna have an expanse of glass, if you take a look at the law enforcement center, where the largest expanse of glass is where that entry is.
Mhm.
All right, same thing with what you had proposed here, a sort of large expanse of glass. one of the things I think about is hurricane, okay? So if we're gonna have a large expanse of glass, we gotta make sure that we have something that's gonna be able to withstand something like that. And I'm not sure that you need it everywhere on the building, but what you do need on the building is you do need an adequate expanse of glass so that you do have that openness that you're talking about from every office all the way down, that you have a good, a good sunlight, good admission of sunlight. Doesn't have to be all glass.
Right.
But and those can be smaller, and I think they would be a lot easier to, if you will, armor
Yeah,
from
to harden,
from
basically.
harden from that. And the biggest concern I would have would be where you do want to have a larger expanse, the trade-offs about the cost of hardening something like that.
Okay.
Okay, so those are, but that, your concept of using the traditional materials and traditional, structure, if you will, but then putting these modern touches on it is fine with me. That seems to be, without getting into, I like this picture, or I don't
Yeah,
like that
right.
picture. As long as it doesn't look like what's up the top of Monticello Avenue, East Berlin. So and I think the problem there is also one, keeping it at 3 stories will make it much more manageable.
I would agree.
Because when you get up to 4 stories or more, it's a little harder to keep it from looking a little different.
Right. 100% agree. Well, see, you two don't disagree. This is all good.
Yeah.
So actually, Ruth and I live in the same model home, so we.
That's right, we do. That's right.
So we have similar kinds of tastes, and I'll reinforce the one aspect of what she said, which is that I was very impressed with the heavy use of large expanse of window that gave us a sense of lightness to the building. I think that what I would like to see in the building is a structure that is warm and welcoming and not intimidating. Because so often you can come into a building, and usually I'm pretty much for formal types of things, but when you come into a building where the government's providing services for you, you want to make people feel comfortable, feel like they belong there, and that they're going to meet people who are open to them and receptive to their concerns. So I'm not, I guess I'm saying I'd like to see softening of corners and expanses.
Okay.
Smart.
All right, this is the only opinion that matters. No, I'm just playing.
That's the neon sign on top. Hipple building.
Stop here. The LEC has got a good design. I like the design of the LEC. And it's the difference in that design, it gives us, as you look at it, you've got walls that are broken up and you've got basically look like 3 structures there.
Yep.
And you've got walls that are broken up, but they aren't broken up. So like the other design where the original one came, each turn is $1. Yep, every turn is $1, and footings and corners and brick and everything else. Where this design is gonna save us some money, and, cause it's easier and you don't have the turns and all that, so, being in construction, I understand that. You can, how they've taken this and changed it, maybe you change the windows, make the windows in the building a little bit bigger to get more light in. I like the front, it gives us enough glass that you know where to go into that building and how to get into it. And, I would like to, on the back side of the building is where we have the garage or the, underneath it's got the little bit of decking area
Right.
there.
The terrace on the back,
The
yeah.
terrace, have a roof over top of that. If it's drizzling, or if the sun's just beating down on you one day. And you may want to have that little bit over there. Plus that'll change the whole look of that back.
It will.
It'll change that back, it'll soften it, it'll shrink it, looking from the road. I like the parking underneath because you don't have that 2 or 3 story parking garage hung out on the end where everybody's looking and go, what in the heck were they thinking when they put that ugly thing up? And I like this because you don't have any of the roof lines like in one of our neighboring cities that it looks like a 1960 gas station, you know, and some of these buildings did the exact same thing, where they're stuck out like this,
Right.
and you might as well put Phillips 66 on there or something
Right.
and drive the old Studebaker in there and fill it up. I think with this style, and we can change some of the stuff on it, but that's kind of becoming what James City County is. And, of course, I agree with Ruth, you know, if we really want to go bad, it should be a fort. And, of course, we can't have a fort, but,
So
but
you're
you-
saying that you like the fact that this really does read as very simple forms?
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing complex about that form right there. It's
Uh-uh.
very simple, very clean.
Yep.
And then it's kind of, they have another repeating element that's the same thing, and then this little connector between them.
yeah.
Okay?
And the
My only other
connector can be the highlight of the whole thing.
Yep.
That can really be the rose in the garden, basically.
My only other question is, how much did Brad pay you to make that statement about this building?
Just too good taste.
Okay, so I'm really an architecture freak. I like to see flowing lines. I
Okay.
like to see curvatures. So I would like to see, you know, like an entryway where it's kind of shaped like this, and you go in and it's open and high ceilings and like welcoming, like we were talking about.
This.
Similar to that,
Okay.
yes. And then going off from that, but you have it, the way you have it designed is, that could work in the center, that type of thing. I like the brick. I'd like to see some copper. I'd like to see some metal,
Okay,
because I think metal kind of is cool. And it's and when you see it on old buildings, you always notice it, and you always say, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
But they can still be modern
Right.
at the same time. Brick is great. A large foyer, reception area. I think what Mr. Hipple was saying, behind where you park underneath, which I think is fabulous. I hate to see parking lots. But when you enter that, if you can have off of that, maybe a patio or whatever you're talking about, people being able to eat outside, that kind of thing, especially employees. And out the front, I don't want to see I don't want to see any cars. I want to see beautiful green land looking really, really nice.
right.
And I don't know if we have to require buffers and stuff like that, Paul, but it needs to be attractive.
Right.
And especially if you're going to have the parking in the back or on the side there, so when you're coming up Long Hill, you don't want to see cars all over the place, and
Right.
it just needs to be neat and tidy, but I like flowing buildings. I don't like angles. I
Okay.
mean, if you make it all angles, it's not attractive. So a mixture is fine. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
That's about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I'll be honest with you, I mean, you guys actually say a lot of the similar things, so that's great. I mean, you've told us a good direction to head. We can come up with some options, have the working group kind of vet those out to a certain level, and then bring it back in front of you guys and get more input. So this is great. This is exactly what we wanted. It's perfect information.
Great.
I'm happy. I don't know about you, Brad, but I'm happy. So.
No.
So you wanted to leave here with
4 questions.
your 4 questions, which it sounds like the exterior we have reached.
Yes,
Do you need a consensus on the parking?
yes, I would like that.
Okay,
So the 4 issues that I sort of want to make sure we're moving forward in the same direction, right? That's what I really want. Site layout, everyone good with that site layout?
I like that it's
I
pulled
like
back more
Yep.
centered in the lot, and you don't have a big parking lot at the back.
Me too.
Parking lot.
So.
you need to go on the microphone for the TV.
Site layout, we're good with that. We're good with one building, school admin in there as that wing. So when we get down to the end, we add it or don't add it, depending on where we're going, but we're able to move forward with everything else. So,
Well, I think one thing that's important to point out is whether we stay together or whether we separate, we know at some time in the future, school admin needs a spot because James Blair will, the plan is to add on to Blair, or that building that they're in will become simply obsolete because of the age. So at some point, they will need a spot to go.
sure. And
So-
whether it's them that goes there or some other
Right.
group that goes there, whatever the case may be, we are developing the site to be able to accommodate that. That's
Got it.
something we've talked about right from the beginning. The site would be developed for stormwater, utilities, and everything to be able to accommodate that, so.
Okay.
Perfect.
And
So-
I would look to build it now, not make it well, we can add it on later, and we'll disrupt everything we've got going on. And we need to build a building like that, with that wing on there, because if not, then all that construction, all the trucks, all the nonsense, all the disruption, and everything else, and the cost, it's gonna be more. It's not gonna be less. So, like I say, we're gonna bite this apple, we need to take a bite out of it.
Totally understand. We don't have to make that decision
Right.
today. But you all will absolutely be weighing in on that further down the road. So we're good with all that. The only other issue really is the parking, and I heard a lot of, I really like the pedestal style parking. So is that the route?
Yep.
I like that as well. I think the only worry I have there is the additional cost. What I don't want to see is the cost of the parking, because so many things that happen, and I hear Mr. Hippel, but the realities become, oh, well, we've done this, so now we've got to cut this. So we're not able to do, and then we always, I live this life on my school board life. So we have no auditorium where we can have anything because it always gets cut. So that is a concern, is that I like that parking as well. I think it's more safe. I think there's a lot that's more attractive about it. I just think we have to make sure that we're having a very open, and if it gets to whether it's parking and then something that we really need in that building that we're looking at cutting because of the parking, I think we have to be able to come back to that.
Sure. And everybody knows, we're not deciding today.
Right,
We're not paying for it today. We're
Right.
not doing all that today. This is just the road we're going down.
Right.
We can certainly veer off, and at the end, we're going forward with the idea that we're going to do pedestal parking. If it gets to the end and we don't, that's okay.
All right.
We can certainly do that, but
But
the
we've all,
consensus from the board right now is pedestal parking, that's where we're going.
yeah.
yeah.
And-
So Brad, I have a question. So if we decided not to do under parking, I think that parking garage where you had it on the one plan, nobody wants to view that from the street. When you're coming up to on Long Hill Road, I mean, I would say if I was doing it, I'd flip the whole thing over and put the parking center in the back and turn the building around. Other than driving down and saying, where's this beautiful new place? And you're looking at a two-story parking garage, I'm sorry, I wouldn't want that at all.
Sure, and we've had those discussions.
Yeah, I mean, I was
We've-
looking
we've
at it
talked
earlier
about
today, and I thought, okay, if we took away the parking deck there and turned this whole thing that way and put the parking on the back, at least you're not looking at it from either Depew or a little bit, but certainly not from Long Hill Road.
Sure, and that is absolutely one of the big advantages of doing
Okay,
pedestal
okay.
parking, so.
But the thing too is you gotta remember is with that sloping lot,
I know,
once you start moving things around,
I know.
the site work is gonna be tremendous to try to relocate. And so what they're trying to do is utilize that slope, but also be able to get, with a cost, the parking underneath and utilizing that slope at the same time, because you're gonna put a wall up regardless was in the middle or on the edge. And so if you can utilize that soil, it still will cost more to put it in, but in the long run, it's safer, it's cleaner, it's green, it's more efficient. It's just a smarter
It was
move.
just an idea that
Yeah.
if you had to do it.
Yeah, if we
You
had
don't
to
want
do
to
it.
be the focal point of your whole new place, driving up
And
is your
looking at a
parking garage.
Exactly, you don't want
Sure.
that.
You don't
Sure.
want that.
And, and like I've said in the past, this is not gonna be cheap. I want everybody to know that right now, it's not gonna be cheap. But in the long run, it's not gonna be cheap to fix all these dilapidated buildings we have in James City County, and that aren't gonna last 50 years or 40 years, and we can fix them up and put Band-Aids on them and put lipstick on that pig, but it's still gonna be a pig. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, buts about it. Or we can go, you know what, we've gotta take and move forward and put the money into a good product that our citizens will have for 40 or 50 years, and they'll be proud of what we have, and we're not basically adding an addition onto the outhouse to save $3.
Sure.
All right.
My two cents. You know I'm passionate about it a little.
No, and
Get
I-
out of here.
I appreciate the discussion. So we have all we need. I think we're good moving forward, and I greatly appreciate everybody being here. Thank you all so
Yes,
much.
thank everybody
And
from,
thank you.
from coming. This is the most serious group over here. They are taking it all in. Yeah. I wouldn't, they look like a panel, so, thank y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, guys, thank you all. That was great discussion, appreciate it. So. Yes, I remembered this time. We will go into a recess for 5 minutes. for the following: discussion concerning a prospective business or industry where no previous announcement has been made of the business or industry's interest in locating or expanding its facilities in the community pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A5 of the Code of Virginia. 2, discussion of the award of a public contract involving the expenditure of public funds and discussion of the terms or scope of such contract where discussion in an open session would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body pursuant to Section 2.2-3711A29 of the Code of Virginia. Sorry, we need the doors open, and at least one, until we actually go into, thank you, pertaining to the contract for the joint operation of schools
So move.
between the county and city. Thank you, Mr. Stevens.
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Oh.
We're in closed session. Board will come back in open session. I need a motion to certify the closed session.
Madam Chair,
So
I move to
moved.
certify that we only spoke about those items we indicated we'd speak about in the closed session.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Motion carries.
I do need a motion to adjourn until 5 PM on September 10th, 2024 for the regular meeting.
So moved.
Thank you. Mr. Stevens?
Ms. Knoll?
Aye.
Mr.
Aye.
Hippel? Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye. We're adjourned.